Welcome to Slash Forward, the channel where we provide summarization and commentary on all your favorite popular and obscure horror movies. In this video, we're going to take a closer look at John Carpenter's The Thing. I got the idea for this video when I was putting together the summary video for this film. The trivia section of IMDb was filled with detailed fan theories about which expedition member became a thing at which point, and specifically focused on the implications of the ending scene. I thought to myself, surely a simple, careful viewing of the movie with some detailed notes could resolve all of these questions. I discovered that I was entirely wrong about this. In the process, I've become convinced that part of the reason these details are so interesting to discuss is because there is no clear resolution to this problem, which is why, despite the joy you may derive from developing fan theories about this movie, they're almost certainly wrong. This video lays out my argument to support this. I plan to make more videos in this series as I happen to come across movies that seem to have an active fan theory community. Feel free to discuss your thoughts on this movie, or make any suggestions of movies you'd like to see discussed in future videos in the comments below. Now on to the topic. The first thing to understand is that it is a mistake to view this movie in the context of it being a typical mystery, because it's not. A mystery is created by giving the audience something intriguing to ponder, and then providing a limited amount of information, either directly or indirectly, that may imply the outcome as the plot unfolds. This information could give insight into the specifics of prior events that we didn't see, the possible motivations of the characters, or insight into alternative perspectives, which can cast doubts about things we thought we knew. It doesn't work as well when you simply withhold information or very directly and intentionally point the audience in a direction that leads them nowhere, which is the case with this movie and why it doesn't work as a proper mystery. This is demonstrated by the initial infection that occurs after the stray dog is brought into the facility. At first, we don't know the dog is a thing, but we know that something is unusual about the dog. This is mainly shown through tracking shots that consistently bring our attention back to the dog. We eventually get confirmation of our suspicions when it's put in the pen with the other animals. This leads us to think back to when we saw it enter one of the bedrooms to get the attention of an expedition member. We only see the crew member in silhouette and are led to believe that this individual is overtaken by the alien. In this scene, John Carpenter didn't use any of the actual actors from the movie to cast the shadow we see. So even if we think the shadow resembles one of the expedition members, it's not any of the expedition members in reality. It doesn't mislead us into thinking the wrong crew member has been infected. Rather, it implies that someone has been infected in a way that gives us no possibility of figuring out who. This doesn't actually add mystery. It provides no information. Aside from not offering useful information, it actually becomes irrelevant, because the outcomes of almost all of the characters is known, and ultimately inconsequential. Here's a rundown of the fate of each character. Bennings dies as a thing. Norris dies as a thing. Copper dies as a human. Fuchs is an unknown, but we do know he's dead because we find his body. Given that no other thing allows itself to be burned completely without transforming in some way, it's probably safe to assume that he dies as a human. Clark dies human. Palmer dies as a thing. Windows dies human in the process of being assimilated. Gary dies human. Knowles is an unknown, but we can assume he dies human because he doesn't have enough time to be assimilated, and the entire area where he was gets blown up. Blair dies as a thing. Since we end the movie with only 2 expedition members, it doesn't really matter what happens to the rest so long as we eventually end up at the final scene. Having almost no information beyond this is why this movie doesn't function well as a mystery, and it's one reason why sorting out the order in which each of the characters succumb to the aliens is an impossible task. The other main factor that confounds our efforts to sort things out relates to the biology of the aliens. Rather than making the things an individual organism that consumes you and creates a perfect replacement copy over a set period of time, as we see happen earlier on, Carpenter chooses to introduce the cellular aspect. This makes it appear as though the process works more like a viral infection, which makes it impossible to know the point of first infection for any character with any degree of certainty. It's not just about who was alone with whom and for what period of time like a game of Mafia, because swapping of bodily fluids and germ transference becomes a factor. There's just no way to follow that, especially when you have characters handling other characters' dirty underwear. Who knows what's on that? This leads us to other inconsistencies and complications introduced by the way the aliens are handled in the movie. There's a tendency to address the question of infection order by observing the behaviors of the expedition members, but this doesn't necessarily help either. In terms of the aliens themselves, we don't get to know much about them. Because of this, we can't spend too much time attempting to explain or ascertain their motives and desires. They appear to be an organism that exists on a micro level, individual cells that parasitize and then emulate other organic material. However, they are able to synchronize in a way that allows them to interact and proliferate on a macro level. They work together to create and mimic larger organisms and appear to be capable of utilizing knowledge and prior experiences of the host. This allows them to appear relatively normal in human terms. Moving too far beyond this into discussions of their motivations or strategies will almost immediately stretch the conversation into pure speculation. We're never given insight into their level of consciousness. We also have no direct understanding of how this organism fits into the broader scheme that unfolds within the movie. For instance, we see a ship and then a space where a body was extracted, but there's no other available information. Perhaps this organism organism is not the primary alien that actually flew the ship, but just happened to be on it and be the organism that they found? What if it was designed as a means to help the primary aliens with maintenance and other routine functions? Blair was building a ship, but there's nothing about the biology of this organism that would require it to maintain a human form in order to perform normal tasks. So why did it? Furthermore, we don't know why it was building. There's likely no portion of a standard helicopter that would be suitable for space travel. We may presume it just wanted to escape, but how does it know there's somewhere to escape to? You're probably screaming at your screen right now, but the point is that these questions could go back and forth forever. I'm just trying to demonstrate how quickly they move into pure speculation. Another behavioral problem is introduced by the ending. The ending is the other hotly discussed topic because we all want to know what happened to MacReady and Childs, and if they made it out alive. At least half of this question, actually, is also a known outcome. Carpenter, prior to any portion of the expanded universe existing, explained that he intended to reveal the final outcome of the movie and how he staged the last shot. The sequence is harshly backlit. As a result, every time MacReady talks, he's pumping out steam to the point that his face is almost totally obscured. On the other hand, Childs shows no signs of breathing. This is supposed to indicate that Childs is a thing, so we don't know their ultimate fate, but we know what they are. However, this information makes earlier parts of the movie more confusing, especially in terms of the alien behavior. If the aliens exist as individual cells that amalgamate to create a replica of a larger organism, then it seems unlikely that it would have to engage in any of our higher-level biological functions. It perfectly mimics us by creating blood and lungs and other organs, but it doesn't actually have a need to breathe. None of these organs are part of its own biology, and it doesn't require any of them to function. It follows that if Childs doesn't need to breathe, he also doesn't need to pump blood. This means that a mimicked heart is irrelevant to a thing functioning. If this is the case, then why does Norris have a heart attack? There's no physical reason this must happen, even if we presume that it was an unintended consequence of mimicking a man on the verge of a coronary, because a thing doesn't need to pump blood. This means the reason it fakes a heart attack, if we assume there was a reason, is behavioral, which makes the question insoluble because we never find out anything about how the aliens make choices. This was likely put in the film because it was awesome. It doesn't advance the plot, and it complicates our ability to understand why certain things happen, despite being completely worthwhile. But we're left with no understanding of why it happened, and given information at the end of the movie that indicates it was possibly completely unnecessary in terms of the plot. I mentioned that John Carpenter commented on the ending prior to any extended universe material existing, which is an important place to draw the line when venturing outside the universe created within the movie itself. This is a comment made shortly after the movie's release that directly references the movie without changing anything about it. What he says is easily observable by anyone watching the movie. Some theorists assert ideas based on additional information provided from supplemental materials developed long after the original movie, but this information tends to exacerbate our inability to find answers to our questions. For example, the 2011 prequel introduces the idea that the aliens are not able to replicate inorganic matter, so they can be identified by a lack of jewelry, fillings, surgical hardware, and so forth. In the original, Childs can be seen wearing an earring in the final scene, indicating he's human, based on this rule. In addition, Carpenter later said that he considered the comics to be canon. My understanding is that the comics start with MacReady being saved and Childs freezing to death, which indicates that Childs was human, supporting the earring theory. Both of these later developments contradict the lack of breathing in the final scene and introduce rules that can't be confirmed in any other part of the movie. If we assume that this information applies to the original, then this detail presents a contradiction to Carpenter's original intent, which would then require additional retconning to explain, and so on. It also creates continuity errors within the original movie. This is why, when trying to assess the events from the first movie, you have to discard everything from the extended universe, as well as any outside lore, like the original story it was based on, and the original adaptation of that story. But there's good reason to do this. This movie was conceived as a standalone story. It was enough of a commercial and critical dud that John Carpenter believes it partially stalled his career, even after the popularity of Halloween. As a result, the movie did not in any way support the creation of additional supplemental material until it got popular much later on. So later comic books, video games, and other media would be add-ons that weigh down the plot of the original. They may be entertaining and interesting in their own right, but they're not necessarily supported. We can't view the events of the original in the context of this new information. Ultimately, this movie does not provide us a mystery to unravel. What it presents us with is a straight horror film with elements of misdirection to add confusion and create a heightened sense of tension and atmosphere. We're made to feel the confusion and paranoia of the expedition members. Any details we don't get are of no consequence because the final results are essentially all known, and any mystery arising out of the finale appears to be mostly by mistake. It is intriguing to consider the possibilities regarding the questions of when and how, in a way, specifically because there's an absence of information filling in these gaps. We want to try to explain some of the most memorable portions of the movie because we love them, but they don't necessarily fit. However, withholding information and creating misdirection were intentional choices. It doesn't in any way detract from the strength of the movie, if you view it for what it is, but because of all this, as much as you may cherish your favorite fan theory, it's almost certainly wrong, or at least unprovable. Even though I may have just destroyed your hopes and dreams, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching.